Claire Dawson never imagined that a single quiet evening in Vancouver would change the way she looked at the people in her home. It began like any other day, simple, uneventful, predictable. She finished her shift at the community center, stopped at the grocery store for vegetables and milk, then walked into the house expecting nothing more than the usual chatter from her stepson, Evan, and the clatter of basketball, shoes being kicked off in the hallway. But that evening carried something different in the air, something she didn't notice until she met the eyes of her stepson's best friend, Luke Barrett. Luke had been in her home for years, practically growing up in her kitchen and backyard. He wasn't family by blood, but he was close enough to feel like it. Claire had watched him go from a shy little boy who barely spoke to a thoughtful young man with an unusually gentle nature. She always felt protective of him, maybe because she knew he didn't get much warmth in his own home. But until that night, she never realized how much he hid behind his quiet smile. The evening started normally. Evan and Luke walked in after practice, both sweaty, both laughing at something Evan found hilarious. They dropped their backpacks near the door as usual. Evan bounded upstairs, calling out that he needed a shower. But Luke stayed behind. Claire noticed the instant it happened. Devin disappeared up the stairs, and Luke simply didn't follow. He stood at the edge of the kitchen with his hands in his pockets. His posture was tense, not uncomfortable, but loaded with something he seemed unsure how to express. Claire put the lettuce in the fridge and gave him a small smile. "You want water, Luke? There's cold ones in the fridge." Luke shook his head. "No, I'm good." He didn't move. Claire paused. She'd known this boy long enough to sense when something was wrong. His usual politeness had a nervous edge tonight. His eyes didn't quite meet hers, and when they did, he looked away almost immediately. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. He took a breath like he was preparing himself for something difficult. "Claire, can I ask you something?" he said. Those words made her straighten up. They weren't unusual on their own, but his voice carried weight. A kind of trembling honesty she wasn't used to hearing from him. "Of course you can." She turned fully to him. Luke stepped closer, his shoes making the faintest sound on the tile. He stopped a few feet away, respectful of her space, but still close enough for her to see the unease in his eyes. "I don't really know who else to ask," he said, "and I don't want Evan to know I'm asking this." That made Claire's heart tighten. She didn't know whether to feel worried or honored. "You can talk to me," she said. "Whatever it is." Luke pressed his lips together, trying to find the right words. His fingers curled into his pockets like he was holding onto something invisible. I think I need advice," he said quietly. "Real advice. Not from friends. Not from someone my age. From an adult who actually understands things." Claire's chest warmed at his sincerity. Luke had always been mature for his age, but never this vulnerable. "What kind of advice?" He hesitated. Then his voice came out softer than before. "I need advice. About love." Claire froze out of all the things she expected. School problems, a fight with Evan, stress about college. Love was not on the list. "Love," she repeated gently, not wanting him to feel embarrassed. He nodded once, quickly, like admitting it made him uncomfortable. "I know it sounds weird coming from me," he said, "but I don't have anyone to talk to. I don't really have a close relationship with my parents. My mom's always busy, my dad barely talks, and the people at school, they're all just guessing. They pretend they know how to handle feelings, but they don't." Claire listened closely, her heart pulling a little. Luke's honesty cut through her silently. She knew his home wasn't warm, but she didn't know it felt this empty to him. "I'm graduating soon," he continued. "I want to make good choices. I want to understand how to treat someone right. I want to understand what real feelings look like. And," his voice dropped even lower, "and I figured you're the only person I trust enough to ask." Claire's breath caught. She didn't know what surprised her more, that he came to her, or that he had been holding these emotions inside for so long. "Luke," she said softly, "you're not bothering me, and you're not weird. Asking for guidance is actually mature." He looked relieved, but only for a second. His eyes still held something deeper, something he wasn't saying yet. "I don't want to mess things up," he said. "I want to grow into someone who's good for others. Someone kind. Someone honest." He looked at her with an openness that made the moment more fragile than she expected. "And you're the most genuine person I know," he said. Claire felt her face warm. Not with embarrassment, but with the weight of what his words meant. She was older, married, a stepmother in her life. Had she thought a teenager would look at her with such raw admiration? Before she could reply, the upstairs floorboards creaked. "Luke," Evan called. "You coming up?" Luke stepped back instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. His expression tightened with worry. "Please," he whispered. "Don't tell him I asked you." "I won't," Claire assured quickly. Luke gave a tiny grateful nod, then turned to head toward the stairs. But halfway across the kitchen, he paused again. He didn't look back, he just stood still for a moment as if trying to steady his thoughts. Then he climbed the stairs and disappeared into the hallway where Evan was waiting. But even after the boys were gone, Claire stayed frozen in place, her hands still resting on the fridge door she had forgotten to close. What just happened? Why did Luke come to her with something so personal? Why now? And what exactly was he feeling that made him sound so afraid? Claire closed the fridge slowly. Her home felt quiet in a way it never had before. Not uncomfortable, just different. Like something tender had been placed on her shoulders without warning. She moved to the sink, running water over the tomatoes she had meant to wash, but her mind wasn't in the kitchen anymore. It kept going back to Luke's voice. His nervousness. His trust. The way he had looked at her, not romantically, not inappropriately, but with the deep longing of someone who needed emotional guidance. Had never been given. That kind of vulnerability was powerful, and it touched her more than she expected. She knew Luke wasn't trying to start anything inappropriate. He was a thoughtful young man reaching out in the only direction that felt safe to him. But still, something inside her felt strangely shaken, almost like a soft echo of emotion she didn't know what to do with. Was it just concern for him? Or was it something more complicated, something she didn't have the right to name? She didn't want to overthink it. She didn't want to create meaning where there wasn't any. But that moment, standing in her kitchen with the memory of Luke's trembling voice, lingered in her chest as the evening grew darker. When Mark came home an hour later, she couldn't tell him. Not because she wanted to keep a secret, but because it wasn't her story to share. It wasn't a scandal or a threat. It was simply a young man reaching for guidance because no one else in his life had shown him how to navigate complicated emotions. But as she continued preparing dinner, one thing became clear. Luke's question wasn't a small moment. It wasn't something that would fade tomorrow. It was the start of something emotional, something unexpected. Something that would make Claire look at her life, her family, and herself in a completely different way. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next afternoon, Claire couldn't shake the memory of Luke's words from the night before. The way he had come to her with such honesty, with trust so pure, had left a strange warmth in her chest. She went about her day preparing meals, organizing the kitchen, and checking emails. But her mind kept returning to him, to the vulnerability in his voice, and to the quiet fear he had carried in those few sentences. It wasn't something she could ignore, and she didn't want to. It tugged at her an emotional pull she couldn't name. But she recognized it as the human need to guide someone who genuinely seeks help. By mid-afternoon, she found herself in the backyard, watering the small vegetable patch she had planted the previous spring. The boys were outside too, tossing a basketball back and forth. Evan's laughter rang across the yard as he joked with Luke. Claire watched them for a moment, feeling the normal warmth of family life. But every time Luke looked toward the kitchen window or brushed past her while running after the ball, that same nervous, thoughtful glance returned. It was as if he wanted another chance to speak, to continue the conversation he had started. And Claire felt it too, a quiet anticipation, almost like both of them were waiting for the right moment. When Evan announced that he had to run to a friend's house to pick up a package, he left the backyard in a rush, leaving Luke and Claire alone. There was a silence between them that was neither awkward nor heavy. It was charged, subtle, like a quiet understanding that something important was about to happen. Luke approached her slowly, hands slightly trembling at his sides. Claire met him halfway, her heart steady but alert, sensing the seriousness in his steps. "Claire, can we talk?" he asked softly. "Just for a minute." She nodded. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Luke's gaze dropped to the grass. He took a deep breath, then looked back at her, his expression earnest. "About yesterday. I hope I didn't cross a line. I didn't mean to make things weird." "You didn't," Claire said immediately. "You surprised me, that's all. And asking questions is never wrong." He gave a small, relieved nod. "Thank you. Because I really need this. I don't have anyone else. I don't want to grow up clueless about how to care for someone, about how to treat people the right way. I want to learn. And I trust you." Claire felt a tug in her heart. He wasn't just asking a casual question. He was asking for guidance in navigating something as complex as human emotion. And he trusted her enough to confide in her directly. There was something rare and beautiful about that. She wanted to give him the answers he needed, the reassurance he craved, but she also knew she had to be careful with her words. This was about emotions, not rules. About understanding, not judgment, Luke, she began, choosing each word carefully. Love isn't something you master in one conversation. It's something you experience. It's about patience, about listening, about respecting the other person's feelings. It's about being kind even when it's difficult. And understanding that sometimes people will make mistakes, then that's okay. He listened silently, his eyes locked on hers. There was a hunger in his gaze, not romantic. Not in a way that crossed boundaries, but a thirst for knowledge, for clarity, for guidance. He wanted to do things right. And Claire knew that whatever she said now could help shape his understanding of relationships, kindness, and respect for years to come. "I've seen you care for people," she continued, "in small ways, in ways others might not notice. You notice when someone is sad, when someone needs help. You don't ignore feelings. That's the start of understanding love. That's what makes a person trustworthy and kind." Luke nodded slowly. I get that. But how do you know when you care about someone more than you expect to?" His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "When you feel something you didn't plan on?" Claire's heart skipped a beat. She knew he was talking about emotions he didn't fully understand, yet feelings that could confuse a young person. And yet she realized that answering him honestly could help him navigate his own heart. She took a deep breath, keeping her tone calm and measured, guiding him without giving more than he could handle. "You notice it in quiet moments," she said. "Not in big gestures, not in dramatic scenes. You notice it when their presence matters to you. When you care about what they're feeling, when you want them to be okay, even if it doesn't affect you directly. That's when you know your heart is involved." Luke's eyes softened. "That's exactly how I feel," he admitted. "And it scares me." Claire reached out, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. It was a comforting touch, full of warmth, but not crossing any boundaries. "Feelings aren't wrong, Luke. They're human. But timing matters. You're still growing, still learning. And the most important thing is understanding yourself before trying to understand someone else." He looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "You always know what to say. You make it make sense." Was the kind of moment that could easily be remembered for a lifetime. Claire felt a quiet pride not in herself, but in his willingness to open up and seek guidance. She understood something about human connection that day. Sometimes it's the conversations you never plan with people you never expect that teach you the most about who you are and how to love, not romantically, but emotionally, with sincerity and care. Just then, Evan returned, bouncing into the backyard, his energy loud and bright. "Mom, Luke, you ready to grab that package?" he shouted, unaware of the heavy conversation that had just taken place. Luke stepped back, offering Claire a small smile, respectful, grateful, and full of understanding. He had asked for guidance, and he had received it. But he also understood the boundaries. He wasn't expecting more. He wasn't crossing lines. He was just a boy learning how to navigate feelings that were bigger than him. Claire smiled back at him, her heart still warmed. There was no awkwardness, no tension, only a quiet emotional connection that would stay with them both. It was the kind of connection that doesn't need to be named, the kind of understanding that exists in trust, respect, and shared human experience. As they went about the rest of the afternoon, Claire realized something important. Life isn't always about excitement or grand events. Sometimes it's about the quiet moments, the private conversations, and the trust someone places in you. Luke's question had been unexpected, but it had created a moment of growth for him and for her. It reminded her of the importance of patience, empathy, and the power of simply listening. The evening light softened the backyard and the air grew cooler. The boys finally returned inside with the package, laughing and joking again as if nothing had changed. But Claire and Luke both knew something had shifted. Something deeper. Something lasting. It wasn't love in the romantic sense, it was something far more profound. It was emotional guidance, trust, and the beginning of understanding human connection on a level that most people don't experience at 17 or 40-5. Claire cleaned up the dishes while Luke went to his room. But her mind wandered back to the conversation again and again. She realized how rare it was to witness someone so young, so respectful, and so willing to seek help for their emotions. She admired him, not for anything superficial, but for the honesty he carried. And she knew that moments like these, fragile, delicate, filled with raw truth, were what made life meaningful. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Claire reflected on the afternoon. Luke's questions had been simple in words, but enormous in meaning. They reminded her that guidance, kindness, and understanding are forms of love that don't need drama or passion. They need patience and clarity. She understood that even small conversations could ripple through someone's life, shaping their approach to relationships. Empathy and self-awareness. Claire also realized that trust is a precious thing, especially when given so openly by someone so young. Luke's willingness to confide in her was an honor, and she felt a responsibility to continue guiding him gently. It wasn't her job to direct his life, but it was her chance to teach him about respect, care, and emotional intelligence, the kind of values that would stay with him forever. As she sat quietly in the living room that evening, she imagined the future. Luke would grow, he would make mistakes, he would experience heartbreak and joy. And he would look back on moments like this one and remember the clarity, the kindness, and the patient guidance he had received. And Claire understood more clearly than ever that these moments, unexpected, tender, unplanned, are sometimes the ones that teach the most about human connection. In the quiet of that Vancouver evening, Claire felt an emotional peace. Luke had come to her seeking answers, and in doing so, they had shared a moment that neither would forget. A moment that transcended age, circumstance, or expectation. A moment that reminded both of them that honesty, care, and emotional guidance are forms of love in themselves, love that shapes hearts without ever needing to be romantic, flashy, or loud. And as she turned off the kitchen lights and looked out at the softly glowing streetlights, Claire knew something important. Sometimes, the most unexpected conversations are the ones that change lives the most. And this was one of those conversations. It wasn't over, not completely. The impact of what had been said, what had been understood, and the trust that had been placed would ripple through their days. But for now, the moment stood still.